Taurus, there is a reason you have been feeling that something around you is not as secure as it appears. And the most important part is that you do not need to force yourself to explain it before you are allowed to trust it. You have always carried a deeply rooted need for stability, belonging, and something solid enough to build your life upon. Yet recently, that inner sense of security may have started to weaken in ways that are difficult to describe. Nothing may look obviously broken. No one may have openly admitted that something is wrong. There may be no visible evidence that you could place in front of another person and say, "This is what I mean." And still, whenever you attempt to settle into certain situations, something inside you quietly resists. It can feel like standing inside a beautiful house while sensing that the floor is moving beneath you. Everything appears normal from the outside, yet your body notices what your conscious mind keeps trying to dismiss. You may have questioned yourself more than once, wondering whether you are simply being too stubborn, too cautious, too unwilling to adapt, or too sensitive to subtle changes that other people seem completely comfortable ignoring. But Taurus, what you have been sensing does not mean that you are imagining problems. It means your intuition has been registering something before your rational mind has been able to organize it into words. Your inner compass does not always speak through dramatic signs. Sometimes it communicates through tension in your body, hesitation in your chest, discomfort in your muscles, or that quiet internal resistance that appears whenever you are being asked to accept something that does not feel genuinely secure. You have probably tried to reason with yourself before. You may have told yourself to be patient, to give people another chance, to focus on the positive, or to stop making everything more complicated than it needs to be. You may even have stayed silent because keeping the peace seemed easier than admitting that the peace itself was costing you something. For a long time, you've been willing to build bridges for other people, even when you were the one standing on the unstable side of the river. You have learned how to make yourself convenient, agreeable, patient, and understanding because you wanted others to feel safe around you. Yet there comes a point where maintaining an unstable version of peace becomes more exhausting than facing the truth. That is the place you are approaching now. You are not suddenly becoming difficult. You're becoming unwilling to abandon yourself simply to preserve someone else's comfort. There is a difference. Your intuition has been whispering the same message through different situations. Something here does not feel stable. Something here is slowly wearing me down. Something here cannot support the future I am trying to create. The strange part is that the person connected to this feeling may not appear dangerous at all. They may be familiar, gentle, dependable, admired by others, and seemingly incapable of doing anything openly wrong. They may know exactly what to say, and may appear whenever they are needed, fitting perfectly into the role everyone expects them to play. That is precisely why your reaction may have confused you. You may have looked at their behavior and found no obvious reason to distrust them, while your body continued to become tense whenever they entered your space. You may have wondered whether the problem was inside you. Perhaps you thought you were being unfair. Perhaps you tried even harder to think positively about them, hoping your discomfort would disappear if you simply changed your perspective. But sometimes the body responds to an emotional atmosphere long before the conscious mind understands what it is responding to. A person does not always need to attack you directly for your sense of peace to become depleted. Sometimes repeated exposure to an unhealthy dynamic gradually causes you to become smaller, quieter, more hesitant, and less certain of yourself. It is like trying to establish a home on ground that appears firm until the pressure begins to reveal how unstable it really is. Taurus, you have always wanted to believe that reliability on the surface meant sincerity underneath. You wanted to believe that promises were genuine, that support was freely offered, and that kindness did not come with an invisible price. You naturally appreciate consistency, because consistency is one of the foundations upon which you build trust. Yet there may be someone whose presence offers the appearance of security while leaving you strangely exhausted. They may compliment your dedication, admire your persistence, or speak as though they are supporting your progress, while something beneath those words feels different. You may sense comparison where there is supposed to be encouragement. You may notice an unspoken desire to measure themselves against what you have built, even though you never entered the situation wanting to compete. That distinction matters. You are not disturbed because someone else is successful. You are disturbed because the energy surrounding you may carry a quiet tension that your instincts recognize, even when the conversation sounds pleasant. What may trouble this person is not simply what you accomplish. It is the way you remain grounded while continuing to grow. It is the fact that you can create, persist, and become more secure without needing to diminish anyone else. You do not have to chase attention to leave an impression. You do not have to announce your value for people to recognize it. You do not have to participate in a competition that you never agreed to enter. And that may be exactly what makes your presence uncomfortable for someone who measures their worth through comparison. Taurus, this is where your awakening becomes important. You're being asked to stop reducing yourself so that another person can feel larger. You do not have to make your sincerity smaller because someone else feels exposed by it. You do not have to hide your accomplishments, soften your presence, or constantly apologize for being secure in who you are. Genuine humility does not require self-erasure. It comes from knowing your value without needing to use that value as a weapon against anyone else. You have already shown that you can respect other people without comparing yourself to them, and now you must extend that same respect toward yourself. When your body gives you that first signal of discomfort, you do not have to create a confrontation. You do not need to accuse anyone. You do not need to gather evidence simply to convince another person that your experience is real. Sometimes the most powerful response is quiet distance. You can step away from a space that no longer nourishes you without making a public declaration about why you left. You can stop offering your energy to situations that repeatedly leave you depleted. You can choose environments where your effort is received with appreciation instead of examination, where your growth is welcomed instead of silently measured, and where your presence does not make you feel as though you must constantly defend your right to exist exactly as you are. Then something unexpected begins to happen. Once you remove yourself from an atmosphere that has been confusing your instincts, your perception becomes clearer. The mental noise begins to fade. You stop replaying conversations and asking yourself whether you were too rigid. You stop wondering whether you misunderstood every subtle reaction. You stop constructing endless explanations for why someone makes you feel unsettled. Instead, you reach a quieter place where you can simply acknowledge what your body has been telling you. That moment may not arrive as a dramatic collapse. It may be remarkably ordinary. One day, you simply stop trying so hard. You stop explaining why you needed distance. You stop defending your decision to leave spaces that repeatedly drained you. You stop apologizing for protecting your own sense of stability. You stop forcing yourself to understand every motive behind every person. There is relief in that realization because you finally recognize that not every truth requires a courtroom. Some truths are recognized through experience. Some truths become undeniable because your entire being relaxes when you move away from what once kept you tense. This awakening does not have to arrive like a sudden explosion. For you, it can move like the earth itself, slow, quiet, persistent, and impossible to permanently stop. It reaches the hidden places where you once covered discomfort with patience. It loosens the beliefs you created in order to remain accepted. It exposes the reality that you may have spent too much time trying to establish yourself in places that were never capable of supporting you. Perhaps you once believed that if you were practical enough, patient enough, generous enough, and understanding enough, eventually people would recognize the effort you were making. Perhaps you stayed longer than you should have, because you believed your consistency would eventually produce something meaningful. But sometimes the problem is not that you failed to give enough. Sometimes another person simply does not have the capacity to recognize the depth of what you offer. That does not make your generosity foolish, and it does not make your loyalty a mistake. It simply means that giving more cannot create appreciation where appreciation does not naturally exist. Taurus, you are reaching the point where you no longer need to prove that your intentions were good. You do not have to repeatedly explain that you never meant harm. You do not have to remain somewhere simply because leaving might disappoint another person. You are not here to make the entire world comfortable with your choices. You are here to live in alignment with the part of yourself that knows when something is true, when something is false, when something nourishes you, and when something quietly diminishes you. Your light does not always have to be dramatic. Sometimes your greatest strength is simply becoming a stable presence in your own life. That kind of light may confuse people who expect you to perform, compete, or constantly prove yourself, because it does not demand attention. It simply remains. And from this point forward, your silence can become conscious rather than fearful. You can choose not to argue because you understand the truth does not become more real when it is shouted. You can choose not to expose anyone because you no longer need their downfall to justify your own departure. You can simply live according to what you have finally recognized, and that recognition is beginning to change the ground beneath you in a way that will lead directly into what comes next. Taurus, there is a point in your awakening when you realize that the life you were trying so hard to preserve was quietly asking you to disappear inside it. And that realization can be more powerful than any confrontation. For a long time, you may have adjusted yourself simply to remain accepted. You softened your opinions because you did not want your words to be twisted into something they were never meant to be. You held back what you could offer because you worried that your abundance might make someone else uncomfortable. You learned to reduce your presence, not because you lacked strength, but because you had become accustomed to believing that being loved required you to become easier for other people to handle. Yet that chapter is reaching its natural ending. You are no longer willing to lower the volume of your own existence simply because someone else prefers silence. You are no longer interested in wearing a permanent smile to protect people who never made the effort to understand the person behind it. You are no longer willing to hide the depth of your heart, just so a shallow connection can survive. Taurus, something inside you has changed, and the change is not loud. It is quiet, steady, almost invisible from the outside, but it has altered the way you understand yourself. You are beginning to recognize that people who possess genuine depth do not require you to perform your worth for them. They sense who you are without demanding a presentation. They do not need you to explain every feeling, defend every decision, or prove that your intentions are pure. Because of this, you are learning to leave unstable ground without treating your departure as a personal failure. You can walk away without believing that you lost something precious. You could allow silence to remain where explanations once lived, because silence can become a language when your soul has finally become tired of defending itself. There is something deeply freeing about reaching the point where you no longer need everyone to understand you. For years, perhaps you believed that if you could just explain yourself correctly, the right words would finally make someone see your heart. You might have repeated conversations in your mind, rewritten messages before sending them, wondered whether you sounded too distant, too emotional, too stubborn, or too demanding. But now, the need to prove your innocence is beginning to dissolve. What you once questioned is becoming obvious to you. The people you once placed on a pedestal may begin to reveal themselves differently, not necessarily because they suddenly changed, but because you are finally seeing what you were previously unwilling to acknowledge. This is why the pain feels different now. It is no longer only pain. It is becoming clarity. And clarity has a freedom that emotional attachment cannot provide. When you understand what a situation has been teaching you, you no longer need to keep reopening the wound simply to find another explanation. Taurus, do not turn around just because an unfinished story makes you uncomfortable. Not every silence needs to be filled. Not every departure requires a final speech. Not every relationship needs a perfectly explained ending before you are allowed to move forward. Sometimes release is the answer that arrives when the soul has become quiet enough to hear its own question. And that question does not come from another person. It rises from somewhere much deeper within you. It asks what remains when you stop organizing your life around being accepted. It asks who you become when you no longer need to earn permission to exist as yourself. Only you can answer that. And the answer becomes clearer when you stop running from the emotions that once frightened you. There is a truth that people who have suffered deeply often understand in a way that others cannot. Pain is not always the final chapter. Sometimes pain is the sound that announces an awakening. It can feel like a bell ringing through the hidden chambers of your life, calling you toward something you have avoided for too long. Whether you understand that voice as God, Buddha, the divine, or the universe within you, the message is the same. Something that no longer belongs in your life is asking to be released. There is a door you have noticed before, but you are not ready to walk through it. Now you are beginning to understand why. Taurus, pain does not make you weak. It can strip away the layers that allowed you to survive while remaining disconnected from the deepest version of yourself. It can expose the comfort that became a cage, the place that once felt like home but gradually stopped feeling alive, and the dream you once carried before experience taught you to fear disappointment. You are not being destroyed. You're being rebuilt from a more honest foundation. Rebirth rarely looks beautiful while it is happening. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like exhaustion. Sometimes it looks like sitting alone at night and admitting that you no longer know what you are supposed to hold on to. But there is another kind of falling that can happen. You can fall away from the identity you created to satisfy everyone else, and you can land closer to your truest self. In that place, you do not have to demonstrate strength every second. You only have to tell the truth about what you feel. There may have been nights when you whispered, "Why me?" because you could not understand why something you once trusted had become such a source of pain. Yet somewhere inside those moments, something unexpected already happened. You did not completely collapse. You became still. You stopped fighting every emotion. You stopped demanding that the pain disappear immediately. And in that stillness, you created space for something sacred to be felt. You may imagine God placing a hand over your chest, not as a dramatic miracle, but as a quiet reminder that divine presence never abandoned you. You may imagine Buddha offering no explanation, simply remaining in silence, because sometimes an exhausted soul does not need another answer. It needs room to breathe. And perhaps that is what you are learning now. You can breathe with the pain instead of constantly trying to escape from it. The breath may feel slow, it may feel heavy, it may carry memories you wish were already gone, but an honest breath can become the first sign that you are returning to yourself. You are coming back to the part of you that existed before you learned how to perform happiness for other people. You are no longer interested in playing a role simply because the role keeps everyone calm. You are no longer willing to smile through conversations that leave you emotionally empty. You are no longer forcing yourself to continue simply because someone might interpret stopping as failure. This is where your understanding of pain begins to change. What once looked like punishment can become a strange form of purification. Pain can remove false layers. It can push you beyond the comfort zone you once defended. It can break structures that you believed would last forever, only to reveal that the things truly meant to remain do not require desperate attachment. Taurus, your steadfast nature once functioned like a protective boundary around everyone and everything you cared about. You could endure enormous pressure because you believed endurance was the same thing as safety. You could remain when others would have left. You could carry responsibilities that were never completely yours. You could hold relationships together long after they stopped holding you. But eventually you learn that being strong enough to remain does not automatically mean remaining is good for you. This time you do not have to hold anyone in place. You do not have to blame them for leaving. You may finally understand that some people did not betray the person you are becoming. They simply could not continue with a version of you that you had already released. That understanding changes the meaning of your pain. It is no longer only something that happened to you. It becomes an inner cleansing, like rain moving through dry earth and washing away what was never meant to remain. After that rain, you may not immediately feel joyful. You may still become emotional when an old memory crosses your mind. You may still feel your body react to places, names, or moments connected to the past. But you are no longer demanding that those memories vanish. You are allowing them to move through you. You understand that healing does not always mean erasing what happened. Sometimes healing means letting the memory exist without allowing it to control the present. An old emotion can arrive like a visitor and leave again without becoming the owner of your home. As that happens, another part of you begins to awaken. It is the quiet part, the luminous part, the part that remained alive beneath all the roles you were playing. It may feel ancient, almost as though this part of you has been waiting patiently for you to return, and you are returning, slowly, imperfectly, honestly, but truly. What comes next is therefore not simply another continuation of the old story. It is the beginning of a life built from a version of you that has been purified by everything you have survived. You can already sense a small movement inside yourself. It is not dramatic. It does not need to announce itself. It is simply clear. It is guiding you toward the place your soul has recognized for a long time. There is a reason you once believed that a certain person was meant for you. Perhaps their first steady look created a feeling of safety when you were vulnerable. Perhaps their voice carried a strange familiarity, as though it awakened a memory you could not explain. Perhaps they appeared at precisely the moment when you had almost stopped believing that trust was possible. Because of the timing and the intensity, you may have quietly called it destiny. But Taurus, there is a lesson here that experience had to teach you because no one could teach it for you. Emotional intensity is not automatically belonging. A powerful connection is not always a permanent assignment from the universe. Sometimes the spark is simply a reflection of a wound that still wants to be seen. You can feel another soul very strongly and still not be meant to build a life beside that person. You can soften because someone offers a gentle gesture and still recognize that softness does not require surrendering your entire world. You can feel safe around someone and later discover that they did not know how to protect the vulnerable places they touched. You once misunderstood that distinction, but Taurus, misunderstanding it did not make you foolish. It meant that you loved without many defenses. You gave from a heart that naturally wanted to nourish. You offered yourself like fertile earth, providing support, patience, warmth, and room for something else to grow. But now you are learning that fertile earth also needs boundaries. Love cannot require the soil to destroy itself simply to keep another thing alive. You once believed that the first feeling of love was the most important part. You may have spent hours analyzing what someone meant, studying how they invested in you, listening carefully to their silences as though every pause contained a hidden message about your future. You may have searched for clues because uncertainty made you believe that love needed to be decoded. But now you are learning something much simpler. Real love does not require constant interpretation. It becomes visible through the way two people live together. Genuine love does not repeatedly make you question whether you're worthy. It does not require you to become smaller. It does not ask you to dim what makes you radiant. It does not keep you trapped between the desire to stay and the fear of being abandoned. There was a time when you accepted that kind of uncertainty because you wondered whether you were asking for too much. You may have told yourself that perhaps you needed more patience, more understanding, more time. Perhaps you believed that if you nurtured the other person enough, they would eventually learn how to nurture you. But that waiting is ending. You are not becoming cynical about love. You are becoming more loyal to yourself. That is a completely different transformation. True destiny does not require you to fold yourself into a smaller shape so another person can keep you. True destiny allows you to unfold. It makes you more honest, more liberated, and more fully present in your own life. It does not demand that you question your values simply to preserve a connection. Taurus, you are not becoming colder. You are becoming conscious. You are not becoming difficult to love. You are becoming unwilling to surrender yourself to relationships that repeatedly lead you away from your own center. And for perhaps the first time, you are learning how to remain with yourself even when your heart wants to run towards someone else. That can be painful because the heart does not always release its attachment at the same speed as the mind. But your deeper wisdom understands something your longing may still be learning. A healing soul stops chasing entrances that remain closed. If someone truly belongs in your life, you should not have to spend every day guessing where you stand. Their presence will carry clarity. Their eyes will not constantly contradict their words. Their actions will not leave you suspended between hope and fear. Taurus, never assume that because you feel someone intensely, you're required to keep them. Feeling is not ownership. Understanding someone does not create an obligation to walk beside them forever. You may love many people throughout this lifetime, but the love you develop for yourself becomes the standard that reveals which relationships can truly remain close to you. You are learning that standard now. With every heartbeat, the weight becomes slightly lighter. With every memory, the tears have less power to drown you, and from that quiet recovery, a new emotional energy begins to form. It is not coming to make you lose yourself again. It is guiding you toward a form of love that does not require you to abandon your peace. You may sense the possibility of someone approaching your life, but not through dramatic longing or emotional chaos. The energy is quieter. It feels like peace reaching the parts of you that once begged to be recognized. And that peace brings you to another layer of awakening. The question is no longer simply, who should I love? The question becomes whether I am willing to choose myself first. For much of your life, Taurus, you may have believed that placing yourself first was selfish. You may have been taught that good people give up their comfort, surrender their seat, silence their opinions, put their needs aside and sacrifice their truth so everyone else can remain comfortable. You absorbed those lessons so deeply that eventually you could give and give without even knowing what you personally needed anymore. You may have told yourself that if someone you loved was happy, then stepping backward was acceptable. Their happiness could become your reward. You lived with a heart stretched far beyond its natural capacity, and perhaps you did not notice how tired you had become, because exhaustion had become normal. How many times did you remain quiet while someone treated your generosity carelessly? How many times did you smile while your emotional or material resources were running low? How many times did you help another person recover while you were privately hurting yourself? You may not have been abandoned by everyone, but enough people eventually left, disappointed you, or failed to meet you with the same depth you offered, that one truth became impossible to ignore. Love cannot rescue another person if the process destroys you. Then came the moment when your endurance reached its boundary. It may not have required a dramatic betrayal. Nothing catastrophic had to happen. You simply began to feel yourself disappearing inside the relationship. You realized that you were becoming emotionally absent from your own life, while everyone around you continued as though nothing was wrong. And for the first time, you chose the action you once believed was unacceptable. You chose yourself. You stopped initiating every conversation. You stopped explaining every boundary. You stopped holding together connections that were surviving only because you kept supplying the energy. You stopped excusing behavior that repeatedly consumed what you considered sacred. And you discovered something important. You did not collapse because you stopped chasing. You did not lose your entire world because you stopped overgiving. Instead, something inside you began to breathe again. You began to feel alive in a way that had become unfamiliar. You realized that you did not need to bend yourself into the correct shape to love another person. You needed to learn how to love yourself with the same patience and loyalty you had spent years giving away. Taurus, choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness. It is the planting of a sacred seed within the fertile ground of your own life. Imagine sitting with your exhausted body and treating it gently instead of demanding that it continue carrying everything. Imagine holding the part of yourself that trembles and telling it that sacrifice is no longer the only way to earn love. Imagine finally saying to yourself that from this point forward, you do not have to destroy your own peace to prove that your heart is good. That is not the closing of your life. It is the ceremonial opening of a new chapter. You no longer give simply to be noticed. You give because you have enough to give. You no longer hold on because you are terrified of losing someone. You hold what is genuinely worthy because you know you deserve to have something that nourishes you too. You no longer step away because you are cold. You step away because you have finally learned how to remain loyal to yourself. And something beautiful can happen when that transformation becomes complete. You begin to attract people who do not need to be rescued by you. They do not arrive asking you to repair their lives or prove your devotion through sacrifice. They simply require your presence as you are. Then eventually comes the moment when you stop looking behind you, not because you forced yourself to forget, and not because you convinced yourself that the past never mattered, but because you realize there is nothing left there that you need to carry. The people who once occupied your thoughts late into the night no longer have the same access to your inner world. The words that once wounded you may still exist in your memory, but they pass through your awareness without cutting into you in the same way. You are not consumed by anger. You are not trying to manufacture forgiveness because someone told you that you must forgive before you can move forward. You simply reach a place where an apology is no longer necessary for your healing. You no longer require another person to understand your experience before you are allowed to trust it. You no longer need someone else to recognize your value because you have finally recognized it yourself. That is when rebirth becomes real. It does not require applause. It does not happen beneath bright lights. There may be no audience celebrating what you have overcome. There may be no dramatic announcement that your transformation is complete. There may simply be you standing quietly before a mirror and noticing that your eyes no longer avoid your own reflection. You see the person looking back at you, and something in that gaze has changed permanently. The question you once asked was, "How can I make them return?" The question you now ask is, "What must I do so I never abandon myself again?" Taurus, that is a much deeper question, and the answer changes everything. You are no longer the person who automatically loves another person more than yourself. You are no longer the one who writes long explanations and receives almost nothing meaningful in return. You are no longer willing to sit quietly while your inner world breaks simply to preserve someone else's comfort. You now know when speaking serves truth and when silence protects your energy. You know when staying has meaning and when leaving is the more honest act. You no longer need to perform the role of the endlessly good person. You no longer need to rescue people who refuse to rescue themselves. You are beginning to understand that genuine kindness is not convincing someone to stay. Genuine kindness can also mean refusing to keep someone in a relationship when the price of keeping them is your own soul. Taurus, this is who you are becoming after the sleepless nights, after the misunderstandings, after the moments when you repeatedly chose other people before yourself. You choose you now, not to prove that you are powerful, but because you are finally respecting the steadfast part of yourself that was once treated as though it could carry anything without consequence. You will love again. You will love with greater depth, greater patience, and greater awareness. But you will not again ask another person to disturb the ground beneath your feet simply so you can call the connection love. The people who are genuine will not fear the depth of your roots. They will understand that your stability is part of your beauty. They will not ask you to abandon your world. They will learn how to build within it with you. And if you are quietly moving through pain today, if you are choosing yourself while the world around you continues to tell you that sacrifice is proof of love, if your awakening is happening without anyone applauding, understand this. You are not alone in the experience of becoming yourself again. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are standing exactly where your inner life has brought you. You are no longer borrowing someone else's role. You are no longer waiting for permission to begin. You are no longer repeating a story simply because it is familiar. You are finally living from within your own truth. That is the deepest form of freedom available to you now. And thank you, Taurus, for remaining present with every layer of this emotional journey instead of rushing past the parts that hurt. Thank you for having the courage to feel what you once tried to suppress. Thank you for refusing to abandon yourself one more time. May you have enough stillness to recognize the quiet voice within you, enough clarity to notice when an old pattern tries to return, and enough inner light to meet yourself again as someone deeper, calmer, stronger, and more radiant than the person you once believed you had to become in order to be loved.